Hello and welcome. My name is Caitlin, and I am the Alumni Engagement Officer for the Critical Language Scholarship Program, a program of the U.S. Department of State. This is the first webinar of this year's National Security Webinar Series, a four-part series that will dive into unique national security topics and feature insights from Critical Language Scholarship Program and Boren Awards alumni. Before we dive in, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today, you will get to hear from a distinguished panel of CLS and Boren alumni, all of whom hold exciting roles in the realms of security, technology, and innovation. Please note that the views expressed by our guest speakers are personal and do not necessarily reflect the perspectives of their employers or any affiliated organizations. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, we ask that you please hold them until we transition into our breakout rooms. We hope to go over as many of your questions as possible in the breakout rooms later in this session. At the end of this webinar, you will also be given a brief survey. Please take a moment to complete it because your feedback will help us to continue to enhance this series. Now I'm really excited to kick off our session, and I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker for opening remarks, Allison Patz, the Director of Boren.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and good evening, everybody. It is a real joy to be here today. As Caitlin mentioned, this is the second year that we're doing this series on national security careers that our wonderful alumni are doing at a variety of federal organizations and beyond. It was a huge success last year, more than 1,200 registrants. So I'm just so pleased to see a continued interest in hearing from our alumni and their really rich, meaningful careers. For many years, our alumni, both of the Boren Awards and CLS program, have made valuable contributions to our nation's security, and we're hoping to highlight just a few of those contributions tonight, as we did last year. I'd like to just take a moment, if I may, to talk a little bit about the importance of language skills and cultural competency in the national security context. And in a globalizing world, language and international skills truly do become more important, not less important, in managing the business of the US government. The idea for the start of the Boren Awards program actually began in 1991 with the legislation, the David L. Boren National Security Education Act. And what Senator Boren from Oklahoma in 1991 saw was the need for Congress to address what they saw to be a dearth of language skills in many important ranks of the US government. So, kudos to you, our language learners, our future applicants, our alumni, university partners. By gaining cultural skills and improving language proficiency, our alumni are extremely competitive candidates for federal positions across a wide variety of national security positions. And I'm just so excited to hear from all of our alumni today. It's a dynamic group that is with us, and it is also a very diverse group that is with us. Over the history of the program of Boren Awards, we've made awards to award recipients from all 50 states and Puerto Rico. I know that State Department has done the same with CLS. We've really made advances in those studying foreign language that are coming from a variety of majors. And I'm super pleased that our class of 2024 Borens, more than 20% are STEM majors. So I am so pleased to see that students that are studying science, technology, engineering, mathematics are also wishing and hoping to gain those critical language skills and cultural competencies abroad. So thank you very much for joining our series today. I'm looking forward again to seeing what our alumni have to say. And I will pass to my colleague, Ms. Heidi Manley from the State Department for her opening comments as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Allison. And hello, and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Again, my name is Heidi Manley, and I have the great fortune and privilege to serve as the Chief of USA Study Abroad within the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, or ECA. On behalf of the State Department and our esteemed colleagues at the Department of Defense, I am thrilled to welcome you to the second year of our National Security Webinar Series. Special thanks to our esteemed colleagues at the Department of Defense for their cooperation in continuing this series, and also thanks to our terrific implementing partners at American Councils who support the implementation of our Critical Language Scholarship, or CLS, program. Thank you also to each of our panelists for being here today, and to our viewers for joining us to learn from these amazing panelists about how they have applied skills gained through their exchange experience in careers in science, technology, and innovation. Before we start, just a few quick words about ECA, which is part of the Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs function of the State Department. Our mission is to build mutual understanding between the people of the United States and people of other countries. We aim to reach this goal primarily through exchange programs that allow U.S. citizens to travel overseas to be part of the cultures and communities around the world, and for people around the world to come and be part of the U.S. culture and our communities here. Over 55,000 people participate in our programs each year, from high school students and professors to athletes and artists. At the State Department, we believe that our outstanding and diverse American students serve as citizen diplomats when they study abroad. These exchange programs are diplomacy, building connections among peoples to support a more peaceful and more democratic world. And our CLS program is a key part of these efforts as it entirely focuses on supporting American undergraduate and graduate students as they learn one of about a dozen critical languages in overseas locations where these languages are commonly spoken or virtually. The CLS program is a funded summer program that provides the equivalent of a year of intensive language study through classroom instruction and cultural immersion. The vast majority of CLS participants study overseas, but again, we also offer virtual programs through CLS Spark to connect students with language resources they cannot access on their campuses. As Allison said, like Boren, the CLS program is proud to play a vital role in supporting the study of critical languages and cultures. Through our program, CLS provides students with the opportunity to immerse themselves in critical languages and cultures, preparing them for careers in government, business, academia, and more. And I'm also excited to add the application for our 2025 Critical Language Scholarship is now open. We are accepting applications through November 19th. So please visit our CLS website to learn more and hopefully to apply. The focus for today's webinar is on science, technology, and innovation. We hope you will continue to join us for our upcoming seminars on key foreign policy topics, including global women's issues, energy, and combating drugs, crimes, and human trafficking. As Secretary Blinken has stated, we are living through a time when technology is reorganizing the life of the world that we all share. Every country, no matter its form of government, no matter its geography, no matter size or power, is being transformed by new and evolving tools. The test we face as democracies is how can we shape this transformation in a way that maximizes its promise, minimizes its dangers, and reinforces our core values. In today's webinar, you will hear from Boren and CLS alumni currently working in science, technology, and innovation in a variety of different capacities. Again, we are profoundly grateful to these accomplished alumni for sharing their perspectives on this dynamic set of issues. So we're going to start with some introductions and some questions for our esteemed group, and then we're going to shift to breakout rooms to allow you a chance for a more in-depth conversation with our panelists. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome our panelists. First, we have David Agranovich, who serves as Meta's Director for Global Threat Disruption. David is a 2011 alumnus of our CLS Russian program. We are also pleased to be joined by Dr. Ryan Donaghey. She was an alumni of both our CLS and Boren programs and a Fulbright alumna, and she studied Turkish through Boren and CLS in 2013. Dr. Donaghy now serves as the Acting Deputy Assistant Director in the Stakeholder Engagement Division within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency. We were also joined by Dr. Keenan Albee, who is a 2019 alumnus of the CLS Russian program. Dr. Albee now serves as a robotics technologist in NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And finally, we are also very pleased to be joined by Fatima Floflinker, who is a born alumna and studied in Morocco in 2010. She currently serves as an assistant professor of biology at Clark Atlanta University. So again, thanks to our viewers for the questions that you submitted in advance of the webinar. I'm going to kick us off with our first question and encourage panelists to share more about your background and expertise as we dive a bit deeper. So for the first question, and the order I'm going to go is going to be David, Ryan, Keenan, Fatima, which is, in your view, what are some of the most compelling opportunities for leveraging science, technology, and innovation to enhance U.S. national security policies? And with that, I will turn over to David.
Thanks so much, Heidi. And hey, everyone, thanks for joining this conversation. I'm David Agranovich. As mentioned, I lead Meta's threat disruption team. And just for context on my answer here, before I joined Meta about 6 years ago, I mostly worked in the government. I spent most of my career at DoD and then was a director at NSC before leaving to come work in tech. And so it was, I think what really stuck with me coming to work at Facebook at the time was how much the tech industry broadly, particularly on the security, cybersecurity, and platform like trust and safety side, could benefit from the knowledge and expertise, not only that folks who've spent some time in the national security space can bring, but also how similar many of the problems that we were dealing with were. Most of my day is spent dealing with different foreign nation state adversaries and their proxies that are trying to use our services to target people around the world, whether that is attempting to interfere in an election, attempting to deploy spyware or malware to steal data, or attempting to engage in transnational criminal activity, which is very similar to the work that I did in government. The difference, though, is that in the tech industry, I think there's opportunities to leverage kind of the newest and most cutting edge technology, but also to be part of building the platforms that will shape communication across borders going into the future. And so one of the really cool opportunities here is to take both the cultural and the language knowledge, particularly in my case in Russia, and apply that to thinking about how do we build, for example, connectivity solutions in parts of Ukraine that are occupied by Russian forces? How do we build safe communication systems that are end-to-end encrypted for people who might be dissidents or democracy promoters in countries where they don't have access to safe telecommunications infrastructure? And so I think what I've found was the nexus of working in the companies that are building these tools gives you the opportunity to build in the safety and security that, in government, I was often having to advocate for. Instead, the ability to actually build it as part of the teams that are deploying the solutions themselves.
Should I jump in next, Heidi? Is that the appropriate? Perfect.
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Heidi. And to echo David's comments, thanks for all of you joining this evening. I work at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a broader umbrella part of the Department of Homeland Security. And so I know that when I was looking for positions as a recent graduate of my program, I had a difficult time thinking, how am I going to use my international language skills and my broader sort of cultural awareness to help Homeland Security mission? And so I want to make sure that I'm highlighting a couple of areas in terms of how we actively and proactively use that in the cyber defense and broader national security space. So before taking on the position of stakeholder engagement, I actually stood up an innovation branch in one of our divisions here at the agency. And a lot of the portfolios that we worked on were, how do we understand, both from sort of a national perspective as well as an international perspective, how the broader threat environment impacts our U.S. critical infrastructure, and how can we partner with the private sector, such as Meta and other organizations, to really be able to understand that threat landscape and to be able to proactively make solutions to address those problems. And so in terms of how we have looked at that in specific ways that really require STEM capabilities, we have a whole cybersecurity division, right, that actively and proactively works both domestically with companies companies, as well as internationally, to understand when cyber incidents occur and to be able to share information rapidly when that takes place. We also manage things like the bioeconomy and biotechnology, which is inherently a global activity that requires us to understand how are people building out biotechnologies, where are some of our adversaries thinking about leveraging these for dual use in ways that may harm the US public as well as the global community. We also are obviously very actively involved in the artificial intelligence space, which for those of you who are on the call that may be like me and had a background in statistics, really being able to leverage that machine learning background and understanding of regression and how that's being applied to large language models is absolutely instrumental to our ability to really engage in and recommend safe and secure policies that help us understand how we can effectively use artificial intelligence for critical infrastructure operations, as well as how we need to be prepared to defend against adversarial use of artificial intelligence. We also have an actual international affairs branch that sits under my current division. So we're doing a lot of work in the global policy and standards space. So when we're thinking about building out operational technology, there are standards for that, and making sure that those standards are consistent through consensus building and collaboration with our partners across the globe is really, really vital to the work that we do. So there are a number of ways that we are actively using both folks with STEM backgrounds and STEM capabilities here in our agency. Thanks.
And then I believe I was next. So thanks everyone again for attending, and thanks for the excellent questions too. Really quickly about my background, I was a CLS Russian participant in 2019, and now I work at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. And here we work on developing technologies that let us do robotic exploration for places we previously couldn't go to for scientific discovery. And so in my current role, a lot of that revolves around research work and developing technologies that allow our autonomous systems to operate in places where humans can't operate them for various reasons. Maybe they're too far away, maybe it's too dangerous and they're operating too quickly that we don't have time to respond. And so some of the challenges here are in various domains. We operate on planetary surfaces, but we also operate satellites in low Earth orbit when they're a little bit closer to us. But something that's said about low Earth orbit today is that it's congested, contested, and increasingly competitive. And so this is not something we might deal with for a civil space mission, for example, but it's something you have to think about anytime you operate a spacecraft closer to the Earth. We have all this orbital debris up there caused by various activities that have happened in the past, and the amount of debris is growing every single day. So we leverage solutions that can help us to solve problems just like this, and focusing particularly on this orbital debris problem. Autonomy can help us out quite a bit, and so we're always looking for people that have a robotics background, aerospace and mechanical engineering backgrounds, so that they can help us leverage autonomy technologies to solve problems like orbital debris. Like, for example, if we have to capture satellites that are defunct and are prime targets for causing trouble and generating additional debris that's going to prevent operations in the future, we might require solutions that need autonomy. It's not something a human can operate on the ground to take that satellite out of orbit and save it. And so that's just one example, and there are many more where we're constantly looking to infuse the latest and greatest from the research world so that we can apply autonomy to solve these pressing international challenges that really have quite a bit of impact on our everyday activities. If we can't access low Earth orbit, we can't access our other destinations as well. And I'd be happy to talk more maybe in the breakout rooms, but there are many examples like this where we are continuing to look for the right solutions.
Hello. Hi, I'm Fatima, and I'm going to talk a little bit about basic science research in the government, a little bit about my background before I became a professor. I spent several years working at DOE labs, so Department of Energy, national labs. I was working at Brookhaven National Lab, as well as Argonne National Lab, and I also spent some time at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. So I've been at several DOE facilities. My my expertise is in microbiology and computational biology. So how does that apply to national security? Specifically, I was working with algae and how that can be applied as a biofuel. I've also worked with modeling the metabolic pathways, computationally on how plants grow and how microbes affect plant growth and how those two organisms interact. So these kinds of basic research can be applied to crops and energy. Essentially, the DOE is interested in developing technologies that promote energy independence and security as well as food security. So especially during these times of changing environment, there's this push away from fossil fuels and a look towards creating more robust crops that can withstand warmer, drier climates and these fluctuating temperatures. So you might not think basic science, or it might not be obvious how basic science can be applied to national security, but here's just some of the ways that I have applied them in my career. And then lastly, I also did some work with biothreats and countermeasures, basically using biology to determine methods and procedures that we can use to identify biological threats. And so that's another way that someone interested in biology can apply their skills to national security issues.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for that insight. That's a really heavy question. And I have another heavy question that's coming towards you. And again, thank you so much for your good, clear answers and the time that you are providing. So my next question is really about what challenges does the U.S. face in regulating emerging technologies that pose national security implications? And how can policymakers address these challenges effectively while also fostering innovation? And this question seems teed up I'm going to start with Ryan, and then I'm going to go to Fatima, if you don't mind, and then I'll go to Keenan, and then we'll end with David.
Thanks, Heidi. And I'm actually thrilled to kick this one off because I did rulemaking for a number of years, which is a very fun activity that is very outside of the STEM sphere. And so as you are taking on federal careers, I highly recommend that you sort of augment that professional career with that activity. We hear a lot in the emerging tech, I think realm about how do we regulate, the emerging tech. And I think I want to answer the question actually from the perspective of governance, because I think rulemaking as an activity, when those of you who are on the call today become federal employees, which I hope you do, rulemaking and my automatic lights, which indicate that we are environmentally friendly here at CISA. So rulemaking as an activity often, I think technology and innovation far outpaces the rulemaking process, right? The reality of how long it takes to create a rule that helps us understand safety and security of a thing is never going to keep pace with how technology advances. So I think what my sort of perspective is on how we approach that problem set, right? How are we ensuring that these emerging technologies are safe and secure is thinking through governance frameworks and how we approach the governance of an emerging technology. And I think that understanding and having cultural awareness of the market dynamics that exist around the world, right? How do people's laws intersect with the use and integration of this emerging technology is really important, and a skill set that I think folks who get Borans and CLSs can actually really provide into sort of that conversation. At the same time, from a STEM perspective, we often sort of hear, especially in the artificial intelligence space, right? Like, we need to regulate this part of AI. But some of the questions that I'm really interested in folks providing me subject matter expertise on is, how are we integrating the use of that tool into current critical infrastructure operations? And then what part of that perhaps is already regulated by an existing framework that's in the government? And then what's the actual sort of security gap? And so I think governance frameworks allow us to really understand what is the problem or the security risk associated with technology that needs, us to really putting in more sort of checks and balances into the process. So that's generally the approach that I take, but open to discussion and diverse opinions on that one as well. Thanks.
I just have to say, Ryan, I love your enthusiasm about rulemaking. I have never seen anybody light up about this topic, so this is fantastic. Usually my team is like, how can we get around the rules to get to the innovation? But of course, they have to exist in harmony, but it was great to see that piece of,
I will say as
I'm very
one small aside. And for those on the call, when you do rulemaking, right, you can't share any of the rule with the public, right? And I once had to give a brief where we were right in the middle of the rulemaking process, and every single question I had to say, I can't answer that question for you. I was like, this is the most worthless engagement I've ever for these people that I've ever had to participate in. So,
and we do follow the rules. I just want to stress that. Great, Keenan. I think I teed you up next.
Sure, thanks, Heidi. So Ryan had a fantastic answer there. So fantastic, it was actually my answer that it really pace is the problem. But more so than that, it's the rate of change of the pace. Often you have technological innovation that continues along, and then all of a sudden there's a state change. And when those state changes occur, when something is drastically different, it can be very hard for legislation to keep up. So I'll just mention two examples sort of from my domain of robotics and space applications. Again, this orbital debris problem. There's about 27,000 pieces of trackable debris. And back in 2021, there was an anti-satellite test that generated about 2,000 more of them. And of course, we're always very concerned about this because there's something called Kessler syndrome, which you might have seen in gravity, for example, when the debris hits more debris, and then you can't access orbit anymore. So there are these state changes where a new technology or a new application of a technology might happen, and suddenly things start to become very different. And that is challenging for legislation to keep up with. Another example here where there's another state change is the pace of growth around the potential lunar economy and the return to the moon. It's now of interest across the government and internationally, even commercially. We're having commercial lunar landers land on the moon, including the first a successful one last year and multiple queued up for this year. But this means there's now standard setting for the moon, which didn't previously exist. I mean, there are proposals this year of establishing a lunar time zone, for example. So there's all this like norm setting that is now very relevant because very quickly we've had state change in the technological capabilities. So the second half of the question is, how do you handle that? Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer there. I'd really just advocate for making sure there's good communication with the subject matter experts and the policy and lawmaking experts, because really to legislate a technology, you have to understand it. So making sure there's a good connectivity and a good pathway for communication there is key and the only way to keep up with that fast pace of change.
I'm not sure if I'm next, but
Yes, absolutely. Fatima, thank you.
I'll go ahead then. So this question reminded me about this. I'm invited to work at a roundtable discussion meeting for the DOE coming up. And the topic is about the role of AI in biology and innovation. And so even though I'm not a policymaker, this tells me that the DOE is interested in hearing from scientists where we think they should be headed in relation to new generative AI technology, how they can take advantage of it, what challenges to watch out for, and what kind of research they should prioritize funding. Okay, so they acknowledge that this is potentially transformational impact, has potentially a transformational impact. And they want to be a part of advancing science discovery. They want to know how to spend, what direction to go in, how to spend their funds, how to outfit existing infrastructure to take advantage of this technology and what kind of things like, is there training gaps that need to be closed for personnel to take advantage of this technology? So from my perspective, AI is one of those fastest growing technologies that the government will be interested in taking advantage of and potentially needing to create policies around.
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. I think you're hitting at a really difficult balance that I think we also deal with quite a bit in the tech industry, particularly about how to craft regulation that simultaneously effectively protects people, either protects their privacy or protects their safety on the internet, while at the same time enabling new technologies to develop, and in particular, technological markets to develop in different regions of the world. And how to make those regulations future-proofed. I'm always reminded when I talk to regulators, particularly in the EU around tech regulation, of an attempt, I think it was in the mid 1800s in the United States, to cap net worth by constitutional amendment at $1 million, which would make a lot of people who own homes in the United States really, really in trouble today. And so one of the challenges in the tech regulation space is thinking through how do you build regulations that are going to enable your own domestic technology ecosystem to survive, and not going to have the unintended consequence of entrenching established technology giants. Speaking as someone who works at Meta, if you look at what happened with regulations like GDPR in the EU, in many ways, what happened was you created both a technological resource requirement for companies to operate in the market, which was the ability to figure out where your user's coming from, comply with data handling requirements, and also have the legal staff required to make all of these decisions and minimize liability. There are a handful of firms in the world that can do that effectively, and those tend to be really big tech companies with really large legal firms or really large legal staff. That's not the case for startups in Europe. And I think what you've seen in the wake of some of these really large European tech regulatory projects is that they haven't meaningfully changed the size or scope of many of the large multinational tech firms in their footprint in Europe. What they have done, though, is they've massively cut down on the European startup scene, with a lot of European founders moving out of Europe to build their companies in places like the United States, where they can build their firms without hiring 100 lawyers from day one. And so it's a really difficult problem, right? These regulations are critical, particularly as technologies like generative AI become more and more accessible. But at the same time, there are national security implications of who ends up building the foundation for the next wave of technological innovation. In the Gen AI space, something that I think I've been focusing a lot on recently is thinking through the interplay between open source or open innovation AI models and closed source AI models. There's an obvious national security implication to who gets access to sophisticated or foundation model capabilities. There's a vast multinational coalition aimed at trying to limit, for example, China's access to computing technology and underlying tooling to build some of these really kind of front end models. But at the same time, number of countries, including China, but also the United Arab Emirates, have released their own open source versions of models that are accessible and easy to build on top of. And so the question that I think we're facing today is, which model from which country, built in which technological and values ecosystem, will form the foundation of the future of AI innovation? Will it be capabilities developed in the Emirates, capabilities developed in China, or capabilities developed somewhere else like the United States? And so there's this interesting downstream effect of regulatory decisions beyond just what limitations do we place on firms today that govern the data they can share between borders or between their subsidiaries, that floats all the way down to, in 10 years, will people be building their companies on an open AI API capability on top of something like Llama 3 at Meta, or will it be built on top of Falcon, right, which came out of research in the Emirates? And so I think there's the interesting downstream security and cultural impacts of some of the regulatory decisions that we make sometimes get overlooked when we're thinking about how to constrain, in many cases, what companies are doing in this space.
Great. Thanks for each of you for those different perspectives on that question. I'm going to move a bit from the policy space and end with a concluding question on the personal. So again, our focus here today is on science, technology, and innovation. Allison mentioned about 20% of Bourne alumni are STEM majors. We have about the same, about 25% of CLS alumni. I always say, of course, in science, technology, and innovation, I feel like there's a linear path where people have been studying it and have planned to study it, and then there may be a circuitous path where people end up in tech who may not have anticipated going there. I count my brother as one of those who was an English major, so he wouldn't have been a STEM, but now works in computers, one of those technology giants. So many of you may not have started perhaps in a STEM field, but perhaps are thinking of building a career there. So now I'm going to invite each of you to think about what advice, think of yourself at the age of 19, 20, a young professional starting out. So talk to yourself. What advice would you give to yourself at that age, or anyone who is seeking to prepare themselves for careers in science, technology, and innovation? And what key skills or experiences should they really be focusing on as they think about navigating this space? And I am going to start with you, Fatima. And then I'll go to David, and then to Ryan, and then we'll end with Keenan.
Oh, okay. So as a professor, I'm gonna say, focus on and do well in your core science courses. Try to look for opportunities for undergraduate research wherever possible at your university, or take advantage of summer internships. I actually started my whole DOE career with a summer internship. I was part of a Department of Homeland Security internship my sophomore year, where I worked at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And that was really, kind of seminal in helping me choose my career path, making those networking connections. And it looks good on your resume when you apply later on for jobs as well. So whether it's, internships in the sciences or doing one of the language study abroad experiences, just use your summers wisely, I guess, while you're in college, and these connections will, they will be with you in the future. My second piece of advice is to be open to change, in direction of your field. I started off as a wet lab scientist, mostly working on the bench in microbiology. I'm now more computational, and it's okay to make those changes and those pivots in your career. And it's good because you get a lot of different experiences as well. And then finally, in the sciences, I'd like to mention that science is not done independently anymore. It's usually large, collaborative, multi-institutional, multinational endeavors. And that is where that cultural experience, that cultural training and language training really comes into play in the sciences.
I think just to echo some things that Fatima mentioned as well. I think for what I found to be most effective, not just for myself, but for the folks I've hired onto my team in the last few years, is really seeking a diversity of experiences, in particular the experiences early in your career to be the person on the ground doing the work, whether that's field work or lab work, or in my case, working kind of in the analytical or kind of intelligence function that ultimately feeds into policy conversations, provides incredibly valuable and clarifying experience when if you do try to transition to a role where you're advising or developing policy or overseeing or regulating. At Meta, oftentimes what the folks who are most effective in kind of like platform security, cybersecurity, or tech policy space are people who have been either cybersecurity investigators or people who've worked on platform or government investigations or in law enforcement, or who have actually built these systems as software engineers, because they understand the intricacy and the kind of second and third order effects of decisions that policy decisions might have on the systems that they're being applied to. Specifically around, I think, the experiences that you can have in a program like Bourne or CLS, the ability or the experience of actually operating in, outside the United States with either coworkers, colleagues, or students in another country in another language, and having to adapt your communication and your persuasion to a entirely different paradigm, I think has huge downstream benefits, regardless of which career, what part of the technology or science field you end up in. I think something that I tell engineers here all the time is, being a brilliant technical expert will get you extremely far in the Valley. But being able to communicate effectively and being able to balance competing opinions and figure out how to diplomatically communicate the position that you're trying to advance and be able to dumb down the technical issues that you're working on to audiences that may not understand them, that is the thing that will kind of break you through the technical ceiling. And so being able to marry your ability to communicate, to empathize, and to be diplomatic with the technical knowledge that you might bring from a STEM career is the thing that I think that the ingredients that ultimately can bring the most success.
And I'll highlight a few items. I think the first one, as you're sort of moving into careers, hopefully following, the award of a Boren or critical language scholarship, I think it's really important for each of you to take the moment to think through what type of person am I in terms of how I approach information and the types of jobs I like to do. I think that the federal government, for example, has a ton of different types of jobs, but are you the type of person that really wants to be committed to deeply understanding one particular type of thing? What I found for myself, my background is in statistics. I did a lot of work in social sciences. I found that I'm somebody who gets very bored very easily. If I've mastered a thing, I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. I want to move on to the next really difficult thing to master. And not everyone's like that. And I think it's really important as you navigate your career to think, am I the person that really wants to have that deep subject matter expertise? And then try to find sort of jobs that match that career progression. And if you want something where there's something new and exciting, there are also those types of jobs and you're able to do that as well. But I do think when I was 17 or 18, did I critically reflect on what I was thinking about in terms of my job performance? And I think that's sort of a really important thing. I think in terms of the skills here that are really, really valuable for folks to have, I think David touched on one that I think is really, really important. And it's this notion of translation of technical terms, right? So ideally you'll go in to literally learn a language and you'll be able to sort of translate things. But I think we often forget about the translation of scientific concepts, which is really, really important. And I know that when I served as a data scientist here in CISA, one of the real qualities that I brought was my ability to say, this is what this means in executive speak, or this is what this means in your daily life. And that's a really important skill, I think, for people to pick up, because the people you're communicating to probably don't have that skill and they just need to make a decision. And then I think the final thing that I'd recommend, especially for STEM folks, is take a social science course, especially if you're getting into national security. The measurements that we use for things are what I like to call squishy measurements, right? It's not clean. It's not always as easy to sort of measure the impact of the work that we do or how we define security here or in different countries, right? And so understanding how social science can help us measure more difficult concepts might be something I think of value for folks that might be really interested in using data science or data analytics in that type of field. Thanks.
Sure, and then I'll conclude here. So I think first and foremost, the most important thing is that you really enjoy what you're working on, because there are often in careers in science or research or technology, there are often periods of a long slog. You might be grinding for a little bit, and what's really going to get you through some of that is really loving what you do and caring about the mission and the application of where your work is headed. Now that said, you might not know initially what exactly you want to do, and that's totally fine. Like Heidi mentioned, there can be a linear path, there can be a circuitous path, and even though I'd say I'd probably have one of the more linear paths and do approximately what I wanted to do and ended up somewhere somewhat close to that. There's a lot of value in what we call in the reinforcement learning world, the exploration, exploitation trade-off. So there's a bit of searching around for, okay, what do I want to try, and searching and searching. Eventually you find something that really hits for you and really clicks. It's okay to try different things, and it's very a very good time to do that is a bit earlier on in your career. You can try different internships, different courses, different research experiences, and really find what works for you. And so for me, that involved a subtle migration from first I thought I wanted to be a physicist, and then a mechanical engineer, and then a roboticist, and then working on space systems, and the end result was some amalgam of all of those things. And so I'd really just emphasize those two things again. Really enjoy what you're working on, and it's okay to take some time to figure that out. The last part of that question was skills and things you should focus on in a technical career. Sort of echoing what David and Ryan said, the communication aspect is hugely important. And part of that, I think, is applying your technological skills and demonstrating your work, right? If you're a mechanical engineer building some hardware, universities often have fantastic hardware teams like Formula SAE, for example, where you build something physical and then you can go and show it off. And that really gets people excited, and especially being able to communicate your work through what you've built lets you convince others of its value and show them exactly how important it is. So that applied hands-on work and being able to communicate it, which Ryan and David already talked about really nicely, is very important.
Excellent responses, all of you. Thank you so much for that guidance and information. And I like to emphasize, for those who may not be aware, most of the federal government internships are now paid. That was not the case when I was in school, so I am really delighted that the access to federal internships is very broad now, and there is funding that is attached to those, to most of those. And with that, so again, huge thanks to our panelists for being here with us today. As a reminder, the application for our Critical Language Scholarship Program is now open. It closes in November, so please do check out our website. I would be remiss if I did not mention a couple of other programs that I oversee. Our Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship Program, which provides scholarships for American undergraduate students who are Pell Grant recipients to study abroad, closes tomorrow. So you still have time to put together an application. And next week, we will be launching the application process for our for U.S. colleges and universities to apply for grants under our IDEAS programs. So these are all initiatives that we have ongoing this fall, and I encourage you all to check those out.